Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be looking at agricultural reports with Groundsure. My name's Bronwyn Townsend, and I'm the Marketing Manager here at InfoTrack. I'm joined today by Andy Crawshaw, and in this session, we will look at the risks associated with agricultural land. Before we begin today's webinar, which we expect to take around 30 minutes, I'd like to draw your attention to the box on the webinar software that allows you to ask questions. Type any that you have in here and we'll answer them at the end of the session. I'm now going to hand over to Andy to present.
Thanks, Bronwyn, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. So, as Bron said, over the next half an hour or so, we're going to be looking specifically at agricultural transactions. So, we'll have a look at the guidance, the main types of risk, and what to do if any of those risks are highlighted in one of our dedicated reports. So the procedure when buying agricultural land is similar to that employed when buying any piece of freehold or leasehold land. Section B8 of the Law Society Conveyancing Handbook, the 26th edition, specifies additional issues are investigated during the purchase of agricultural land. Whilst historically, individual inquiries had to be raised for each of these things, either during pre-contract searches or through the seller, which could be very time-consuming, here at Groundsure, we have ensured that where possible, these are now covered within our dedicated agricultural report. So each report is written manually by one of our in-house environmental experts who examine current and our comprehensive collection of over 1 million historical ordnance survey maps. Each report has a section underneath the address and above the site plan which identifies the writer and reviewer. Our consultants can be contacted easily by calling Groundsure if there are any further questions or queries regarding our agricultural report. But having a look at what to consider when buying agricultural land. The UK's most common agricultural impacts are associated with the use of pesticides, nitrogen compounds, livestock waste and soil erosion. There are numerous environmental impacts arising from farming processes which affect water bodies, humans and ecology. I'll go through a few of these processes in the upcoming slides, but such impacts can include surface water and groundwater pollution, acidification due to the use of fertilizers, excessive buildup of nutrients, greenhouse gas emissions, local disturbance such as odor and noise, and the spreading of heavy metals, pesticides, toxic substances and pathogens. There are many environmental impacts arising from farming processes which impact water bodies, humans and ecology. Due to the nature of pollutants and common pathways associated with rural settings, environmental impacts can be found localized within the farm and immediate vicinity and have the ability to spread to greater distances. Environmental risks associated with farming are commonly linked with operational activities such as storage and handling of hazardous substances and wastes, including fuels, oils and pesticides, discharge of contaminated waters and intensive farming. In order to reduce their potential impacts, certain activities may require formal permits from the Environment Agency. Our historical mapping often allows us to identify ponds, disused workings or old quarries across areas of agricultural land. If, over time, we can no longer observe these features visually on mapping, this indicates that they may have been infilled. These areas can often be infilled with waste from nearby land uses, including farms and mines. Unless the infilled land has recently held or currently holds an environmental permit specifying the waste accepted, we cannot determine the exact contents of the potentially infilled area. Infilled land has many possible environmental risks associated with it, and the severity is determined by the amount and type of waste the area is infilled with, the underlying geology and hydrogeology, and the proximity to people or other organisms that may be significantly affected by exposure to contaminants. Infilled land, if not managed correctly, can result in groundwater pollution, soil fertility issues, and air pollution from greenhouse gases such as methane. Consequently, human health can be at risk if pollutants filter into groundwater used for drinking water, and if the gases build up in units on infilled areas. Often, prior to construction, the local planning department will issue the use of adequate control measures, such as gas membranes or gas monitoring schemes across the areas affected. Recently here at Groundsure, we undertook a phase 1 environmental risk assessment at a farm which was undergoing modernisation with the development of an anaerobic digestion plant. Prior to the construction of the ADP, the client raised the development area by moving in material from unspecified heaps across the rest of the site. This infilling or raising operation has the potential to cause issues if these materials to be moved aren't tested for contamination. If the materials were found to be contaminated, moving them around the site would spread contamination across the development area. However, in this situation, Groundsure assessed that the waste was suitable for construction purposes, and this is a good example where infilling or the use of material to raise land could cause environmental problems. Fuel storage in one or more tanks is common at farms with many agricultural vehicles requiring fuel. The contaminated land risk is heightened when regulations are not followed. An example breach of these regulations would be if the storage tank is a single skinned and does not have a separate bund. A bund is a containment facility around the tank. If the tank leaks, the leak will be contained by the bund. In the event of a leak or spillage, there would be nothing to stop a pollution incident without a bund, and therefore an unbunded tank is of a higher environmental risk. Bunded tanks must be designed to contain over 110% of the tank's capacity to meet the water resources regulations of 2010. Nowadays, the most common tanks on farms are modern plastic and self-bunded, which means they're structurally stronger than traditional tanks. In addition to causing potential contamination of soil, leaks from tanks have the potential to percolate into underlying aquifers. This is particularly important if the aquifer lies within a source protection zone and is being used for drinking purposes. In addition, leaks could run into sensitive rivers or streams and affect the ecosystems within them. In September 2017, a farmer up in Northumberland was under investigation by the Environment Agency after moving a heating oil tank in close proximity to a stream. This tank slipped off the forklift as it was being moved and polluted a nearby stream and river. This was the second such incident at the farm, and both incidents were looking to incur fines for the farmer. And this again highlights the importance of considering the location of watercourses when installing and moving fuel storage. Farming and agricultural land uses produce large amounts of waste. Back in 2003, there was a survey completed in England which showed 93% of all agricultural waste was natural waste, such as slurry and manure. Slurry is a mixture of manure and water, which is broken down over time by bacteria. The decomposition process formed gases such as methane, a well-known greenhouse gas. Often, slurry is stored over the winter months until it is suitable for spreading during the following growing season. It is often used as a fertilizer and spread across arable farmland. Slurry can be stored in various ways, but it is typically stored in large tanks and occasionally within slurry lagoons or ponds. The Water Resources Regulations of 2010 also states that the requirement for the slurry storage systems. The regulations specify the maximum quantity of slurry that can be stored and that it must be stored more than 10 metres away from any inland freshwaters or coastal waters. In addition, farmers are provided with a health and safety executive fact sheet which assists them with slurry storage guidance. Slurry storage becomes a significant environmental concern when regulations are not adhered to or guidance is not followed. In 2014, an incident at a farm in Northern Ireland led to the death of an 8-year-old boy when he inhaled lethal fumes which had collected over a slurry tank. The child was helping his father mix the slurry when they both felt unwell after inhaling hydrogen sulfide and other lethal gases produced by the slurry. This tragic story highlights the need for correct ventilation when storing slurry. Slurry can also pose an issue if stored too close to surface water features or waterlogged ground. This can lead to pollution incidents and the disruption of local freshwater ecosystems. Incidents are often investigated and sometimes lead to penalties, like the breach by B&M Elkin & Son at Hall Farm in Hildeston, whereby the Environment Agency fined them over £14,000 after thousands of fish were killed when slurry leaked into a nearby brook. All other waste stored at farms is described as non-natural waste. A non-natural waste can be disused pesticide containers, tyres, batteries, plastic, oil and much more. Over 135,000 tonnes of agricultural waste plastic is produced each year, which is 1.5% of England's annual total of plastic waste. Non-natural agricultural waste also includes hazardous materials such as asbestos for building sheets, waste oils and unused animal medicines. So this is a case study from a Suffolk farm, which slurry from a lagoon actually polluted the River Yox for 10 kilometres. The owners, Great Lodge Farm Limited, were found guilty of being negligent. This was back in December 2014, and staff from the Environment Agency saw the river running dark brown, and there was a smell of slurry in the area. They traced it to Bowling Green Farm at Sibton, where slurry was being pumped from a storage lagoon into a ditch. Pig muck was to be brought to the farm from another farm and was to be stored on a muck pad that drained into the slurry lagoon. Miss Wendy Foster, prosecuting for the agency, said that ammonia levels were elevated for 10 kilometres of the river. She told the court that the checks carried out by the company prior to ordering the discharge were insufficient. Staff at the farm blocked the culvert with soil from the farm at the suggestion of agency staff, but by that time the river was already polluted. A director of Great Lodge Farms, Martin Kellaway, told investigators that staff had not been able to spread the slurry because the fields were too wet and it had to be stored. The lagoon was full of what he thought was just rainwater, so discharged it into the ditch to free up space for the muck pad being used. Miss Foster told magistrates that slurry in the lagoon was grossly polluting and once discharged raised ammonia levels in the tributary of the river to 25.4 milligrams per litre. Typically, clean river water has ammonia levels of less than 1 milligram per litre. The company pleaded guilty and they were fined £6,000 and ordered to pay just short of £4,500 in costs. In order to keep up with consumer demand for high volumes of produce, most farmers believe they must use fertilisers to maintain soil health. In order for soil used for farming purposes to maintain a high level of efficiency, it's important that the soil is not depleted of nutrients, thereby affecting the quantity and size of the yield. After each growing cycle, crops will have absorbed specific nutrients, often leaving the soil depleted, thus requiring the use of fertilisers to replace these nutrients. However, excessive use of fertilisers can lead to soil salinity, heavy metal accumulation, nitrate accumulation and air pollution, predominantly nitrogen and sulphur. In May 2017, a farmer who was the same farmer in Northumberland who moved the previously mentioned fuel tank and polluted a river, he spilled 3,000 litres of liquid fertiliser into Long Nanny Burn, which was a surface water feature, and this killed around 2,000 fish and 60 critically endangered eels. This pollution incident affected the watercourse for 6 miles over 4 days, and it shows the highly negative effects that excessive fertiliser can cause. In this case, it was a spill, but persistent use of fertilisers over many growing seasons can have similar effects. Intensive farms are often large-scale and undertake agricultural practices at a commercial level. These types of farms often require permits for their operation, particularly for processes like poultry farming, where over 40,000 poultry birds can be housed. The permits often issued are Part A1 permits, and they outline the correct operation parameters for such large-scale agricultural farms. The Environment Agency monitor these permitted farms to ensure processes are being completed under the agreed terms of the permit or licence issued. The risk for permitted sites is that some companies do not stay within the terms of the permit and on occasions may breach the conditions. These breaches can cause significant pollution incidents leading to a farmer being fined and potential for environmental damage occurring. Further environmental permits, often held by farms, are associated with waste storage and processing or treatment facilities. In recent years, farming has moved towards becoming more sustainable, and some farms have developed anaerobic digestion plants, as mentioned earlier, just to allow them to process their own waste and become less dependent on fossil fuels. Over 1,000 plants were active by 2010 and often require permits issued by the Environment Agency due to their scale of production. Here at Groundsure, again, we recently carried out a phase 1 environmental risk assessment at a farm which had an environmental permit for processes associated with the storage and production of fertilisers. The consultations with the Environment Agency confirmed that this permit was currently active. However, when the environmental consultants from Groundsure completed their site visit, they saw the processes associated with the permit were no longer in place. The owner of the property advised that they had kept the permit in an active status as they believed it would add value to the property. Groundsure advised the owner that although it may appeal to the buyers, it may in fact devalue the property from an environmental risk perspective. Surrendering a permit often means that the site must be returned back to its previous format. For example, if any contamination occurred due to the process as stated within the permit, this would have to be remediated prior to surrendering the permit. As a result, from an environmental liability perspective, having a surrendered permit is reassuring, and it is possible that lenders may favour this more during transactions as the environmental risk is far lower. So rights of way, and why are these important? Back in the year 2000, the Labour government introduced a right to roam clause, which stated that any pre-1949 paths must be recorded by 2026 to continue to carry public rights. The Countryside and Rights of Way Act contained a provision that will extinguish those rights if the paths have not been properly recorded. But why should farmers care about it? Now, whilst the registering of these pre-1949 paths may not benefit the owner of the land, as it means there is a public footpath crossing their land, the landowner should be aware that anyone can register a pre-1949 path with the local authority for it then to be included on the definitive plan. A number of projects are underway to identify and record these rights of way. Further information and guidance should be obtained from the Rights of Way team at the relevant local authority, and within the Groundsure Agricultural Report, current and historic rights of way are always included. So the recommendations and next steps that we provide in our commercial reports are bespoke to each report. They depend on what the current land use is, what has been identified within the search, and what the proposed land use is and what the risk rating is that we give. To summarise some of the recommendations we include are contacting the contaminated land officer at the local authority to determine their intentions under Part 2A, usually if historic land uses have been identified on the site. We'd recommend a phase 1 environmental audit or contaminated land investigation if the site is going to be redeveloped or if permits / landfill have been identified as being currently on site. You can obtain information from the planning department on any contaminated land conditions imposed upon the site and if these have been complied with in the process of being redeveloped or has recently been redeveloped. You can contact the Environment Agency or other national regulator, so Natural Resources Wales or SEPA up in Scotland, to clarify whether the regulator considers the land use to pose an ongoing source of contamination, usually if a landfill is identified or if historical permits are identified. You can obtain compliance with storage regulations, usually if tanks have been identified on the site. Or you can also contact the Petroleum Licensing Officer to obtain tank records as well. So when a Groundsure Agricultural Report identifies action required, it is often due to the current permits or other potentially contaminative activities having been identified within the farmyard. A focused environmental audit of this area allows these issues to be addressed with any potentially significant liabilities identified. This audit provides a cost-effective method of clarifying these risks. A farm audit may also be useful when the report compromises an acceptable environmental risk, but liabilities may reside with the property that a purchaser should consider further, particularly in relation to the farmyard or if certain features have been identified such as sheep dips or tanks. The assessment will be undertaken by an experienced Groundsure consultant and will include a site inspection of the high-risk areas, as identified in the Groundsure Agricultural Report. Using a standard farmyard checklist, the consultant will assess the yard operations for their risk to the conditions of the land and for the risk of regulatory enforcement. The resulting audit will be provided in the form of a completed checklist, a summary of findings, and where appropriate, a reassessed agricultural report. And should a reassessed report not be available, the consultant will provide next steps to be undertaken. The key features of the operational audit are discharges to controlled waters requiring a licence, licensed and private abstraction inquiries, a review of operations to assess whether they fall under Environmental Protection Act regulations, and if so, compliance with the requirements, an inspection of the farmyard for potentially significant land contamination, the application of oil storage regulations, an assessment of waste exemption or other waste management regulation requirements as they apply to the property, and an inquiry regarding the management of asbestos in buildings. And here at Groundsure, we don't just write reports and sell environmental data. We provide much more and can provide bespoke solutions tailored to your requirements. As I mentioned earlier on the bottom of every single one of our environmental reports is our direct telephone number. If your client ever has a question about one of our reports, they can call us directly and speak to the environmental consultant who produced the report, and they'll take your client through everything and answer any questions they may have. We offer full pre and post sale support. We can do a free review of additional information for reassessments. We have client care letters if your client wants to know how and why it's important to get an environmental report, and anything such as a product matrix to show the differentiators between products, product cards and marketing collateral to show what's included in our reports. And we've got our consultancy expertise assisting everyone involved in the transaction. We serve both the residential and commercial property markets, and we can also assist with phase ones and other environmental audits for ongoing operational risk. That's everything from me today. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll pass you back to Bron.
Thanks, Andy, for your time today, and I hope that the rest of you enjoyed the session and found it informative. If you've got any questions about the products that you've seen today, they are available via the InfoTrack platform. If you'd like more information, you can obtain that from your account manager. Thank you, and we look forward to welcoming you to another webinar soon.